This video is a bit complex to understand. Let's take a deep dive into how China understands America, especially Trump's tariff war, and why China isn't afraid of it. China sees the US as a religious country, while China itself is a secular country. Have you ever noticed? Every US dollar bill has the words, "In God we trust." This means when that the US prints money, it's doing so under religious ethic, in the name of God. In contrast, the euro has no reference to God or religion, despite Europe being the home of Christianity. China's renminbi also carries no religious symbols. During the US presidential inauguration, the president places his hand on a Bible and says, "So help me God." As a child, I couldn't understand why such an important political ceremony involved God. Later, I realized it's about legitimacy. The president's power is witnessed by God. On the other hand, Americans might also find it strange that China's leaders place their hand on the Constitution, not a holy book, during their oaths. And in EU meetings, there are no priests, prayers, or religious ceremonies. Europe's modernization was secular, and so was China's, but America's modernization is religious. Warren Buffett once said American capitalism is a big church plus a big casino. Trump's tariff war looked like economic policy on the surface, but it was also a faith restoration movement. He tried to use religion to unite people, but ended up dividing America. To understand this, we need to look at US history. 405 years ago, the Mayflower carried 102 Puritans to the New World, aka the homeland of indigenous Indians. They wanted to build God's kingdom without priests as intermediaries. Their landing represented a spiritual independence even before political independence in 1776. They signed the Mayflower Compact. We covenant and combine ourselves together in the presence of God. It wasn't a constitution, but it planted the seed for America's political culture. Power didn't belong to kings, but to citizens united under God. The early capitalism wasn't driven by greed, but by faith. In the old European view, seeking wealth was sinful, but in the Puritan worldview, hard work, frugality, saving, and reinvestment were ways to serve God. They believed labor redeems sin, wealth is God's reward, poverty is a sign of moral failure. They believe in America being rich isn't a sin, it's a sign of divine favor. The wealthy are seen as God's stewards. This gave capitalism a moral cloak, unlike in Europe. For 250 years, this faith-based capitalism supported America's global dominance. But if hard work brings God's blessings, why is America's middle class collapsing? Why are blue-collar workers relying on painkillers? Why are opioids like OxyContin and fentanyl everyday necessities? Why do 80,000 Americans die of overdoses each year, more than in car crashes? Why can't many afford a $400 cash for emergency use? Why are nearly a million Americans homeless? The real crisis in America is not inflation or unemployment or anything else. It's a crisis of faith. Or let's say it in a secular way, Americans lack consensus. Faith here doesn't just mean church, it means a shared social belief that hard work brings success, labor has dignity, markets are fair. But capitalism has undermined the faith that created it. Protestant ethics give birth to capitalism, and capitalism eventually corroded Roe's ethics. America is regressing into a jungle society dominated by financial elites. Anglo-Saxon and Jewish capital where the strong devour the weak. Blue-collar workers once embodied America's spirit. Deindustrialization didn't just take away jobs, it shattered their faith. God no longer rewards labor, only assets. In the last decades, capital returns far outpaced labor. The richest 1% now own a third of the country's wealth. The middle class shrank from 61% in 1971 to 51% in 2023. By contrast, in China, the middle class has kept expanding, now larger than the entire US population. The middle class is not just an income group, it's the backbone of social order. When effort no longer brings reward, faith collapses. Don't forget 10% of Americans is 30 million people, plus 40 million blue-collar workers and 70 million angry citizens can reshape politics. Trump harnessed that anger to win power, turned it against the Democrats, then against China by hurting those 70 millions. Including those soybean farmers, of course, but he couldn't defeat China, and eventually that force will turn inward. In places like Japan, decline means lower consumption or defaulting on mortgages. Society remains orderly. But in a religious superpower like the United States, decline feels like being abandoned by God. This isn't just economic, it's spiritual collapse. People search for new saviors. Trump appeared as the vessel for hope and rage. As you can see, his rallies resemble religious ceremonies, red hats, chants of "Make America Great Again," collective prayer-like scenes. He turned faith into traffic, and traffic into votes. But Trump couldn't fix the structural problems, so he created an external enemy. Manufacturing decline, trade deficits, inflation all were blamed on others stealing your jobs. Tariffs became a political tool, a modern crusade. It's not an economic fix. There is public anxiety temporarily, but don't solve the real issue, face collapse. China, as a secular country, has faced the US bullying, tariffs, and sanctions since 1949, yet hasn't developed mass hatred toward America. We still learn from America in some aspects. Instead, it's driven internal innovation in China. Chinese people don't see America as the real enemy. China itself is. If you can't overcome yourself, you can't overcome others, okay? Trump's tariff war mirrors the Crusades. In medieval Europe, plagues and division caused the faith crisis. The Pope sent people east to save the Holy Land, really to redirect frustration outward. When nations repeatedly shift blame outward instead of solving internal issues, collapse isn't far. Western religious culture relies on identifying the other, heretics, enemies, to maintain order. Eastern traditions like Confucianism focus on self-cultivation first. Trump told Americans the trade war was the world's problem, including China, not America's. Don't you think it's coward's behavior? China isn't afraid of someone who can't dare to face their own core issues. When a religious nation is in systematic anxiety, it looks for enemies to prove God still loves me. That's why we say Trump's tariff war is a modern crusade, wrapped in Make America Great Again. So now the logic is very clear. Puritan faith and Protestant ethics and capitalism, consumer society, faith collapse, anxiety, external blame, tariff war stimulate internal crisis. But how to solve internal crisis? First, Americans have to face it, not to dodge it by robbing others, including those 70 million Trump believers. The Trump's tariff war is not an economic game, it's a spiritual self-rescue, a way to shift blame, but it doesn't solve the core problems in America. Trump is wasting America's time, and time is something large-stage cancers don't have. Follow me, an Eastern perspective, to see the world.